Welcome to our final session of Blue Line Expo International. This session features a panel of mental health experts who will discuss officer wellness and resilience. This session has been pre-recorded, but the panelists are with us live and are able to answer questions in real time. So please utilize that chat function. They will be happy to expand on any ideas and answer any questions you may have. Thanks again for joining us.
Hey there, everyone, and welcome to this session. It's a panel discussion on officer mental health. The title for today's session is Save an Officer, Save a Career, an open discussion on mental health in law enforcement. My name's Adam Kinakin. I'm the managing director of the ILET Network and host of the Tactical Breakdown podcast, and it is a complete honor for me to be here with all of you today. Now, you're probably wondering, is this a live chat? Is this what's happening with this session right now? Is it a Q&A? Can I ask questions? The answer is yes. What you're watching right now is a pre-recorded session that we recorded earlier, and you're going to have the opportunity to engage with every single one of these panelists here on the live chat right now. So if you have your chat bar open, you're going to be able to ask questions to any of the panelists, to other attendees on any of the topics that we're bringing up today. What I would ask, of course, is that you keep decorum. You don't post or comment anything that's inappropriate, obviously, as this is a professional event. The experts here will be able to answer your questions or direct you to resources or other places where you can get answers to your questions. And so what I'd like to do first is introduce the panel. So I'm going to actually just pass it off. We're going to go clockwise around. The panelists can introduce themselves, and we'll start off with the discussion.
Hi, I'm Sejal Bellin. I'm a behavioral science professor and psychotherapist, specializing in working with first responders, basically helping them to navigate occupational stress, both at work and at home, and building safe environments and creating psychological safety so they can be hired right through to retirement.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Robbie Adler-Tapia. I'm a psychologist from the Phoenix, Arizona area. And I have worked with mental health and emergency responders for 37 years, coming out of a law enforcement family and then being an EMT firefighter myself. So I do a lot of post-shooting debriefings. I use EMDR therapy to treat trauma and primarily work in a treatment role. I also do training on peer support mentoring and EMDR therapy with first responders. Thanks.
Hi, guys. I'm Dr. Samuels. I'm the medical director of the Sleep and Human Performance in Calgary, Alberta. And we work specifically looking at sleep issues in law enforcement officers. And my experience has been since the late 1990s working with the Calgary Police Service and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
I'm Dr. Robert Perkins. I'm based out of Los Angeles and Toronto, Canada. I'm the CEO of the Center for Chief Mental Health Officers, but I'm also a professor of psychophysiology and a California Post instructor for policing agencies within the state of California.
Hi, I'm Bill Rusk. I'm executive director with Bagelov Canada. We're a organization across the country dealing with first responders, operational stress injuries. We run a variety of things, including psychoeducation virtually for peer support and programs with streams for participants with OSIs, leadership and discipline programs. My background is policing. I'm retired. I've been involved in many traumatic events. In Canada, I'm the only modern day police officer that's been shot in the face, neck, shoulder, back, and right hand. And no one's been arrested or identified. I'm also married to a spouse that was involved in her own shooting. And to our knowledge, we're the only couple in Canada that both have been involved in shootings. Both have gone through operational stress injuries and all the impacts of that, and are still married, which is unique in the first responder world.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. First of all, thank all of you so much for being here with us today and sharing your knowledge and experience. And if you're watching this right now, you can tell just the vast amount of knowledge you're going to have access to here over the next hour and beyond, because, of course, we want this to be the start of your conversation when it comes to mental health and resiliency and recovery. And I know I can speak for the entire panel here when I say you will be encouraged to reach out to them, to their organizations, for further information or resources if you have any questions at all. So one of the things that came up in conversation before we hit record here today was an incident that just occurred yesterday. So today's Monday, the 12th. So the 11th of April, there was an officer-involved shooting in Minneapolis, of all places, wherein an officer supposedly mistakenly drew her firearm instead of her taser and shot a suspect. And of course, in the law enforcement profession, we are not immune to what's happening in other countries and other regions of the world. Everything is interconnected. And what happens up here in Canada for a lot of us is the same thing that happens in the United States to some degree. And that is an issue that is now going to have ripple effects that are going to be long lasting, since we are still currently going through the current the trial and the process with Officer Chauvin and George Floyd. This is just another piece to that puzzle. And so I know, Robert, you wanted to maybe touch on this a little bit and how you feel it's going to directly impact law enforcement, not only in Canada, in the US, but also internationally.
Absolutely. I mean, we just got past the last year of all of the stress and trauma associated with the pandemic. And certainly law enforcement all around the world, but specifically in North America, felt the stress and trauma post the killing of George Floyd. And so here we find ourselves in a similar situation. And, you know, I happened to have, before it really became public, I had do some work with the policing agencies within Minnesota, specifically Minneapolis. I happened to see the body cam video and things of this nature. And one of the things that we need to really do is, because the things that we're doing right now does not seem to be stopping these incidents from happening, is we need to identify how the officers are feeling in this particular case, as well as the suspects that are being that we're dealing with, because clearly there are misrepresentations. And so, you know, our officers, we're seeing them that they are in a state of hypervigilance where they're fearing for their lives. And we have to really look at the suspect behavior and identify if that behavior is actually adversarial, or is their sort of state of mind causing them to not perceive the situation that they're in to the serious nature of it. And it's causing these mistakes. And so we really have to look at this. This is something that has to be addressed, because this is the number one issue all law enforcement officers are dealing with when it comes to the use of force and how we are interpreting the behavioral actions of the people that we're interacting with. There's a chasm here that we really need to get to the bottom of.
With what happened, I know you had brought up a few different things there. There's so much that's going to fall on our officers, again, with not only the understanding of decision-making processes for the officer, going back to they're afraid to make a decision because they don't know what even just in the court of public opinion, somebody's videotaping them. Am I going to be scrutinized? Am I going to be punished? Am I going to be charged for doing something that I would normally do day to day, but now I have to second guess myself? Which can be dangerous. And I know Bill could probably attest to this. When you have hesitation in certain instances, you're very readily putting your life at risk, or the life of your partner, or innocent parties in that situation, by not making a decision. And I feel like we're getting back to that point again, where officers are going to be afraid to make decisions.
I agree with you on that. I think there's fear on both sides. And I think when you have fear, responding to fear, you tend to have outcomes that aren't exactly what we would hope they would be. We also had another incident where two officers pulled over a lieutenant in the military, and you can see both sides. The officers have a high-risk stop. The lieutenant doesn't understand why he's being pulled over, and he's insisting he know, while the officers are still in that hyper-vigilant alert stage of a high-risk stop. So there are both sides, and then, of course, it's being debated in the media. So I think it's fear. It's fear of making a decision. It's fear of making a wrong decision. And it's fear of how you're going to be tried in the public opinion before you ever get a chance at any court system. So I think dealing with that institutional trauma and betrayal trauma is a huge issue in law enforcement right now, and making it difficult to really be successful.
I would agree. And there's also the component of the ripple effect of what it means on the families and children and spouses of these law enforcement officers. I know that when we went through the Floyd shooting, even the ripple effect up here in Canada was that children were afraid to admit that they were children of police officers. They were afraid of their parents going to work. Spouses were afraid for members to go to work, and members themselves were afraid because there was the scrutiny from the public eye. There was the scrutiny that was happening even from within their own departments. So there's a lot of compounding pressures, stress, and fear. And it becomes very difficult to be able to do your job well, or to do it with sort of that objectivity when you're a human being and going through all the things that you're going through as we experience these things.
Yeah, I think that we have to identify that what we're doing right now, it is not working. And so, we've taken a lot of steps to repair incidents that have happened, but that doesn't fix the initial problem. So if the initial problem is the use of force component and how we're training and teaching people, if that isn't working anymore, well, what are we giving our people to be able to perform properly so that they feel safe as well, both psychologically safe and physically safe? And if that comes down to technology or what that picture looks like. But I don't hear these conversations where, we're just trying to appease people that are protesting a particular act or a particular way that we're doing business. Okay, that's fine. We've identified that this is not working. So what is the next stage, and who are the partners and stakeholders involved in that? I'm assuming it's likely going to look like some sort of technological thing, but we look at what happened with the accidental discharge of a firearm when a person was trying to use a taser. So these are very, very important components, because what is going to happen is you're going to get a lot of current police officers that are going to leave the profession. You're going to have a lot of possible people that wanted to enter the profession that are not. And that's going to affect the level of quality of people that are involved in law enforcement.
I feel like Robert was teeing me up because he knows this is what I talk about on a daily basis with the training standards and how things are going. I want to take a step back. We've kind of addressed already now that we're getting into another societal break where we're going to have this fight again we're starting to build back some type of semblance of relationship between law enforcement agencies and communities. And now it's like we're at risk of fracturing that relationship again. But I want to take it all the way back. I want to go and dive into the minutia of this, and we can use a hypothetical. We can use or we can even use the example from Minneapolis that just happened with an officer that does something, that a situation occurs, somebody makes a mistake. Mistakes happen for a lot of reasons. It could be a psychological reason. It could be a physiological reason. It could be something completely outside of that. What I'd like to talk about what are some of the things from each of your perspectives that could, and of course these are hypotheticals, that could have potentially caused those decisions to be made incorrectly, or have changed the outcome. And obviously I know it's an easy toss for me to throw this down to Dr. Samuels, talking about sleep and fatigue, if that could have played a factor in her decision-making process. Same thing if we start talking about her psychophysiology, what's happened to her in the past through other events. So I'd like to open up the conversation there, as without talking about the 10,000-foot view, I want to start talking from an individual officer perspective. So the officers that are watching this right now that say, I don't want to be that officer, I don't want this to happen to me. I want to start giving them some ways to identify problem areas, but then identify solutions and a way to actually better themselves so that doesn't happen. So I want to throw that out to you guys, and let's see where that conversation leads.
I'm going through my mind as Jill and Robert and Robbie were talking. I'm thinking to myself, you know, I really don't want to be on this panel, Adam. Because the problem for me is I'm hearing the stuff I really don't want to know about. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I know this is going on in these guys' lives. I see them, and one of my colleagues sees them every day. And we just try to deal with what's right in front of us. And you know, I'm dealing with, okay, we have just a basic function, which is sleep and rest and recovery, that as right from the get-go, these guys and women don't have. They don't have normal levels of recovery, which is required physiologically for the brain to work. And so if there isn't just that basic thing, then for centuries, they've been left to sort of fend for themselves, as it were, for just, you know, basically for water. You know, they aren't getting enough water. They're not close to a stream, so they're not getting enough access. And that's what sleep is. So when I listen to the rest of the panel, it makes me kind of nervous and upset because I don't want to know all those things because they're very real. And I see that in a very, very distressing way daily from the members and the officers, because there's a sense of feeling trapped. And I totally understand that from the point of view of being a physician, being on wards, being in the hospital, and those kinds of things. You know, you've chosen this job, and you know, this is it, man. This is what you got to do. So we come up with ways of coping that ultimately, quite frankly, universally become maladaptive. So, you know, that was sort of what was going on in my mind as I was listening to the others. And I just think it's important to, you know, I hear from officers the concerns that they don't have access to the things that they need that are just basic. And I don't know that the agency is responsible for providing that. It's not a question of that in my mind. It's a question of educating them. And that's such a tough thing to do. And it always goes back to education. So the example that I wanted to bring up is this. I see many officers from Britain who've been hired by the Calgary Police Service. And one of the British officers pointed out to me, as things were getting worse in the States in the last year where there were shootings and stuff, which clearly affects these guys when they come in to see us. This is a major stressor for them for all the reasons that everyone mentioned. And he made the point that, you know, the training here in North America is so different than in Britain. And the training is around using your firearm. And the training in Britain, apparently, again, I'm not a law enforcement person, is not focused on that. So I would ask that question to the rest of the panel. Is that a basic point? Is our attitude very confrontational and militaristic? That's embedded in the culture of law enforcement. And is that a big step that we have to make going forward?
I think you hit the nail right on the head. Whether you know it or not, police officers in England and the UK don't have firearms. They're not permitted to carry them.
Right. Yeah.
Only elite units and detectives are. And so the skill set that these officers have to have, both in a de-escalation and negotiating behavior with people, as well as basic physical survivor skills, I would say are at a much higher level than North American police officers are, because we've become dependent on sort of going to that sort of the threat, or at least the threat of deadly force. But that is something that I think really needs to be addressed. Well,
let me ask you then, if we trained officers differently, gave them that skill set, would they be more resilient? Would that allow, you know, in other words, if we're trained as if they didn't have a firearm, would that give them a set of skills that made them more comfortable, more resilient? I mean, you guys are the expert. I don't know.
Unfortunate. I believe it possibly could. Obviously, some sort of study would have to determine that. What you're going to be facing, though, is sort of, trying to debunk, decades and centuries of what we've taught people. You can't unlearn those things. You can't unlearn the sort of history and the dichotomy of how law enforcement in North America has operated for that period of time. That would be a very difficult task.
But I think
one of them.
I think we've got room to evolve, right? And I think that we need to look at it from not just a simplistic view, but a systemic view. There's levels of change that can happen at all parts of the system that can contribute to a greater outcome. And Dr. Samuels, what you're introducing is just one of those aspects. Like, what would that look like? And what kind of skills would that further develop and build? But like I said, I really truly feel that the issues, and I don't think that there's one cause to all the multiple shootings. I think there's so many different variables that come into play with each and every one that's happening. So we need to look at that from like I said, a multi-prong approach and a multi-view strategies in terms of how to address it. And I think it's time. I think it's time that the system or the industry start to evolve at a faster pace, because we're not keeping up with the communities. We're not keeping up with the change.
One of the opponents that I'm hearing about what happened in Minneapolis is, well, why are we stopping people for traffic, and why are we taking those actions for people that are running away from the police? I think that, okay, if that's the way it is, then you know what? You need to make the legal penalty for not cooperating with the police or for fleeing with the police so severe that it's going to be effective. I think that is a great idea. But that's not the way that the law is right now. And so people know that if they've got a chance of getting away, they're going to roll the dice and try to get away.
Dr.
I think
Robbie,
the issue we're missing is the weapons issue in the U.S. And the UK doesn't have the same issue we have here. So it's green beans and bananas from my perspective. I'm in Arizona, where you can concealed carry with no real issues. So I think that's one of the biggest differences is if you can come up on anyone. My husband, who's a school psychologist, had a third grader bring 2 guns in his backpack to school this past week. So and so here he is as a school psychologist dealing with weapons, and he's a psychologist. He's never shot a gun in his life. And so I think I've been sitting on committees, and we've had all the stakeholders at the table, but nobody wants to talk about a violent society that has unlimited access to guns and firearms. And, so we have to look at violence and how kids are being raised. We have to look at the gun issue. Nobody wants to touch that in the U.S. and because it's such a hot topic. But that's one of my biggest concerns here is my officers never know when they're going to get shot. And I have officers that have been shot 3, 4, 5, 6 times. How does that affect you if you're supposed to go back to work? And how does it affect everybody else? Because if you run the risk that you can get shot in the line of duty, and you believe when you go out that it's never going to happen to me, that creates this real conflict with what does happen to you or one of your colleagues. Now what? And in Arizona, and not every state in the U.S., but in Arizona, unlike California, where Robert is, our officers are automatically homicide suspects if they have a fatal OAS. So there's so many things in the law that we need to look at and implement law enforcement for. We have to have legislators at the table. We have to have these common sense civil discourse conversations. But I believe a lot of the public doesn't know. And what I learned sitting on these committees is how much people don't know. Like, they think if an officer has a fatal car accident, they get to go off duty the rest of the day. Maybe they get a couple of days off, and that doesn't happen. You get a fatal collision and you get that one put together, and then you go on to the next one. And Bill, I think you can probably talk to that, having been in the field for so long. They don't give you time off because you just had 4, 5, 6 fatalities in a week or even in a shift. You keep working and take the next call and the next call and the next call. And that's what concerns me. We expect you to do unhuman things as a law enforcement officer. mean, even my engineers here at Intel get a sabbatical every 7 years for being an engineer. But you got 20, 25 years, Bill, you said close to 40, and you don't get a break from that constant trauma that's hitting you. And that's why I say save an officer, save a life, and save a career, because we have to address the society that they're trying to practice in. We can't use the same thing we've always done before. So I think we need to have a more informed conversation. And I believe with Sajal, what you said, there are many compounding factors, and we can't blame the law enforcement for all of that. We have to bring all these other things to the table to have a real conversation.
In law enforcement, we do a tremendous job of creating individuals that are hypervigilant, and that hypervigilant can save lives. It can save the officer's life. It can save the colleagues. It can save the public. But unfortunately, we can't shut that hypervigilance off at some point, and that's just like Dr. Robbie was talking about. We classify that as there's Mack truck incidents, so it could be a shooting incident like is being discussed, but there's also bumblebee stings, which are cumulative. So, but at some point in time, you get enough bumblebee stings, you take out your EpiPen and try to alleviate the toxins that come from that buildup. It's the same thing with your brain, with your body, and hypervigilance is a life-saving technique in policing and law enforcement, military. However, you go to the beach, it's not so great because you can never shut it down. And some of the things that we forget about is that law enforcement, police officers are human beings. They all have come with predispositions before they come on the job. They come with whatever baggage that they've had in their life. They accumulate more baggage throughout as they accumulate those Mack truck and bumblebee stings. And at some point in time, if you don't unpack that, it can cause psychological or operational stress injuries, as we call it in Canada, which might be PTSD, depression, all the different DSM classifications that are there. And the other part of that is, which I'd like to expand into this conversation, is the funding, which for a lot of organizations has already been happening. There's some organizations are losing astronomical amounts from their budgets. Most of those organizations that are losing money don't have the mental health programs in place already. And so if you're taking out a huge amount of money from those organizations and they weren't able to provide that mental health for those members prior, I'm not sure how they're going to be able to do that with that money that's being lost. And a couple things that are happening in Canada here to deal with those kind of incidents is having mental health crisis workers that actually are out on the road with officers responding to those particular calls. And some organizations like the Ontario Provincial Police in the province of Ontario are now actually utilizing that right in the comm center so that they have access to that, and also expanding upon the mental health capacities to assist their members. Because if you have healthy physical and spiritual and mental members, they're going to be able to do a much better job, be a lot healthier, and survive their careers.
Absolutely. And the other thing that's really important when it comes to the subject of what we're talking on is educating members of the general public. In 14 years in law enforcement, I did not have a magic wand to approach a potential suspect and wave that and say, this person is a good person or a bad person. I'm going to make that determination based on what I observe with my eyes and the interaction that's going to happen when we engage these people. And those are the only real things that officers are going to base their decision on, how that threat level is going to get higher and higher and higher. And so when you see people, to which at many times officers don't have that intelligence as far as the information of who this person is and what it is that they're doing, and people are not cooperative with the police, then that's a red flag for them. And these are the only things that they have to base what their threat level is at the time. But the general public doesn't seem to understand that.
I think we also have a movement that we've had historically in the 20s, we had it in the 60s, and now again to battle with law enforcement. There's no cooperation. It's now to argue and fight back and be combative. And I think that also escalates, like you were just saying, Robert, that this encouragement to fight back. And so it's going to escalate from both sides. And I think we all have to come together and have a civil discourse about what we can each do individually and as organizations to make this better, because it's going on. Like you said, we don't have a magic wand. And even before that, we got radio service in the 50s and 60s for law enforcement. And now what you get dispatched may be a fraction of what, the news knows the next week. But you didn't have that information at the time you made the decision you made. And that's what I keep trying to put out to the public. This officer dispatching this call had this much information, and now you have the opportunity of time and to investigate and put it all together. But the officer didn't have that when they made the decision they made. And so, again, I agree. The public needs information, and we need to come together. Because I've been in countries without law enforcement, and I don't want to live that way for me. And that's my bias. I appreciate that people put their lives on the line so I can feel safer in my life.
I wonder if we
hold accountable the people that caused the problem, right? I'm so sorry. We look at the backlash of what happened from the shooting, and it's like, well, the police caused this problem. The police did not cause that problem when we're being asked to solve it. These problems in the community are not a result of just police interaction. This is generational poverty. This is breakdowns in the socioeconomic system. It's breakdowns in the education system. It's breakdowns in the traditional family. And you've created this problem, and now you're asking the police to solve that problem. The police can't solve that problem. They don't have the resources. They don't have the training. Yet when something happens, and the traumatized community as a whole, this is sort of their way of releasing this pressure and expressing their frustration. That can't be, the police are not responsible for that. We need to hold accountable the people that created that sort of crisis in the beginning.
I also think that, our listeners and our viewers are going to benefit from the expertise on the panel. If we could just take a moment and really recognize that, the officers are fearing or having to deal with the general public, the media, and potentially being demonized, then having already problems or issues or perhaps not a safe space at home because of just the accumulation of things that happen with the job and whatever they're already kind of going through. On top of that, or stacked with potential moral injury or sanctuary trauma or sense of betrayal from even the workplace, from past or current things that are going on. What would you say from your area of expertise? Because I know that this is something that I address with many clients, both through both organizations that I have founded. And I just want to know from you and your area of expertise, what is the one thing that you could offer or tell a listener or person as to what will help them to build or be more resilient, or perhaps protect some of their well-being, especially during these difficult times when there's so much going on outside, where they may feel like a lack of control?
Well, yeah, I'm gonna let everybody kind of think about that question for a second. I'm gonna start throwing it around, but I'll take my spot first. I consider myself the least expert out of the entire panel here, so everybody take that with whatever grain of salt you want. My belief is that people need to take stock of what they know, but what they don't know, and educate yourself. And that's where it has to start. You have to be, we talk about this in training all the time. If the officer is in training, but they're completely checked out, you could have the most amazing facilitator in the world. The officer's still not going to get anything from it. And so you need to have that conversation, and it has to start at an institutional level from the recruitment process through academy, through FTO, through, you know, being on patrol, and then up through your chain of command. It all has to be there, and instilling the officer to want to learn and to take time to understand what it is that they are potentially going to face, and then what happens to them when they face those incidents. And it's not just arbitrary information that they're getting from or secondhand information. They have to take and seek out information from people that maybe they wouldn't have talked to otherwise. People like yourselves, which is why I do what I do, and I bring experts in from outside of my bubble, because it helps shape my understanding of how humans train and how humans do things. But same thing can be said for every human being. When you get outside of your little echo chamber of the information you're used to getting, any new piece of knowledge almost seems profound because it's something you didn't expect. And so that would be my suggestion is education, that self-educational component.
That's great.
Who's up?
I was going to say, for me, the biggest thing is if you can really ask yourself what your home life is like, what your relationships are like, connecting with your spouse, your children, friends, family, is to somehow keep an open dialogue or check in with where you're at, what that environment is like for you. And to spend some time, and if you need some support, to get that support to help you reestablish, reconnect, or even strengthen the relationships in your life, because they will be a source of resilience for you. They can be actually foundational in your well-being. So for me, it would be to please look at your relationships in your life, and if they aren't where you'd like them to be, to seek out the support and education, psychoeducation, to help you develop and build them to a place where they become as a place of solace versus a place of stress.
I'm going to jump on and mention why I wrote my book. I wrote a book, One Badge, One Brain, One Life, and I really wanted it to educate people in the trenches. What's happening in your brain? Dr. Samuels talks about sleep, what you need to do to pay attention to your sleep fitness. So that's what that book was for. I would encourage people to look at doing intensives. So Bill was talking about some of the intensives. We do 3.5-day intensives with first responders and their spouses at emergency responders assistance programs. So offload some of that. Don't let it accumulate for 5, 10, 15 years. Yes, I agree, Sajal, your significant others will see some things you're blind to. So will your peers in your work environment. So get that feedback from those people that you trust, who are watching you walk through this process and seeing what's happening to you in this accumulative effect. Dr. Daniel Amen out of California does SPECT scans of the brain and published a study looking at what happens to that post-traumatic stress injury brain. So we know it's a brain change issue after that cumulative effect. But right now we treat it like you're mentally ill or you're crazy. No, it's a post-traumatic stress injury, and it's cumulative because you can't get through this career without that happening. So if you think it's never going to happen to you, one, that's your first mistake. You're going to get exposed. You're going to have the impact of the career. It is a high incident career. And then to make sure you stay healthy, mind, body, spirit, not just fitness, physical fitness, but sleep fitness, mind, healthy family, like Sajal talked about. Cue in with the people that know you. So there's a lot you can do to be proactive in this. Don't wait until you go down. Don't wait until your brain is so full of trauma that you're not making good decisions. So that would be my encouragement for people, is look at all this that's going on in your life and prevent it as much as you can, early in intervention if you can.
Education and awareness.
And part of that,
Go ahead, Bill.
I was just going to add into what Dr. Robbie had said, and part of that is, from my perspective, is leadership. And leadership, it doesn't mean that it's the person, the chief, or the commissioner, or the superintendent, or it's everyone. When you come into law enforcement, you are a leader. You're a leader in your organization, community, and that's where all of our leaders in the majority of organizations in Canada and the United States come from is coming up through from the boots on the ground and the chain of command up to leadership. But everyone in that organization, whatever that organization is, wherever it is, needs to be a leader and understand that concept and how important that is. And we can sit the front line can complain about the leaders can complain about the front line, but everybody has to come together and make it almost a holistic systemic change within the organizations. And one organization in Canada, the Ontario Provincial Police, have a new commissioner, Thomas Creek, and he is the definition in my perspective of what a true servant leader is, and that's taking that leadership triangle, flipping it upside down, and being at the bottom, and you're there to support all those members, not to the members aren't working for you, you're working for the members. And sometimes that leader has to deal with discipline or other like a shooting that might have gone bad or otherwise, and all of the public outfall. But that leader also has to be there and support those members, because that is so important, because at the end of the day, a lot of the things that do occur and discipline that might be required doesn't necessarily mean that member can't be a productive member of the organization moving forward. And it's because one of the key things that I see is that's an experience, and if we can turn those members around and get them re-engaged and back working at a high level, that experience and can be a huge boost to morale across the board, as opposed to a negative if that member doesn't come. And that comes with willingness to want to be a leader for yourself and for your organization, and also vulnerability, being able to if you do need to take a knee, then you take that knee, and that there shouldn't be any negative consequences. But unfortunately, for a lot of organizations in Canada and the United States, that's still kind of a taboo topic with regards to stigma.
I think that education and awareness, both what everybody's basically touched on, is the fact that from an intake at an academy level, officers have to be taught you're human beings, and at some point, every person has a limited capacity on how much stress and trauma that they can take at one particular time. When they reach that point, the check engine light of their body is going to come on. So we need to educate people that they are human beings, that they do have limitations. The second thing is that we need to teach these people to identify when this happens to you. And we all talk about in case of emergency break glass, we see it in fire systems, and then behind there's an alarm or a fire extinguisher. Everyone needs to have that in case of emergency break glass, and ahead of time, what is under the glass for you? Is under the glass for you going to a professional mental health person, or is it engaging in an activity, or is it in talking to a chaplain, or going to your own sort of faith or place of worship? You have to identify these things prior to when you reach that level of fullness in your ability to process stress and trauma, so that you have a game plan for when it happens. Because in law enforcement and emergency services, it's going to happen. So if we teach people that they are human beings and that you will reach your limits, and when that happens, have a plan on how you're going to be able to deal with that ahead of time.
Well, those of you who are Canadian, I assume you're aware of the Road to Mental Readiness from the Canadian Mental Health Organization, or no?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so to me, that actually, Robert, gives a sort of a nice, concrete, simple approach to the idea of knowing when you've hit your limit, knowing where your red flags are, and knowing your own limits. Because I think a lot of people don't even know how to understand the idea that they're going down the toilet bowl fast, and where do you go before you go, oh, this isn't working for me. So I think those tools like that are very useful. But I don't know. Again, this is more your domain than mine. These are just things that I've been exposed to through the RCMP.
Chuck, as far as tools for like an individual officer, I want to let you dive deep into what you do. I mean, like, let's talk about if you had the opportunity to speak to any officer right now and pull them off the road and say, let me give you 5 minutes of my time. What is it that you're sharing with them?
From my perspective, like working with a member or an officer.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I'm just, I'm looking at it through this incredibly narrow window of sleep. It's just something we have to do. And the very simple thing is, you know, how many hours of sleep did you get last week? So it's very simple. You know, it's the number of hours you need times 7. So if you're a person who believes, and a lot of these guys, by the time they're into 5 or 10 years, they don't even remember how much sleep they actually require. But if you ask them in a room, where I'll do a talk to, you know, 50 to 100 officers, you know, most of them will literally come into under 40 hours of sleep a week. Well, there's no question in our minds physiologically that that's not enough. So if all you do is point out something very simple, that gets the conversation going, and then you explain to them, you know, or ask them, not explain to them, ask them, what are some of the issues that you see day to day? What's the difference between night shift and day shift? Because those are big issues. What's the most difficult thing from a shifting perspective? Do you have trouble shifting from night to day, from days to nights? And these are all questions that we ask that give us an insight into what could be fixed for the member or the officer. And so it's just simple questions around a topic none of us pay attention to, which is, you know, getting enough rest.
Yeah, it's absolutely. I have so many things jump into my head from all my individual conversations I've had with each of you. I want to add something to, I want to go back and I want to take a second turn, and I can do that because I'm the host. But talking about responsibility, and then having tough conversations. But to your point, Chuck, real quickly, I mean, people don't realize if you don't know your sleep patterns and you don't understand your natural circadian rhythm for your body, and everyone's different. I mean, there's tools out there. For example, like I have a Garmin watch that tracks my sleep that I started using like a month ago. And I'm not going to share those results with you because you'll just get mad at me and want to have a talk. But I have 4 kids, so it's under 4. So I can do that. But understanding that, hey, listen, maybe I didn't get any sleep last night because of X, Y, or Z. I was up late fighting with my wife, and then the kids kept me up all night, and now I had 3 hours of sleep. And now, again, that fight that I had previously last night is now starting again in the morning as I'm walking out the door. So not only am I physically drained, but now I'm emotionally drained and compromised because of that discussion. And I'm going into my shift, and now maybe I know that I have to, the sergeant's pissed off at me because of something that happened last shift, and I have to have that conversation with them when I get in the door. The officer has to understand, like, you're going into the day almost topped up to potentially what you can handle for that day. And if you can't realize that, that's a recipe for disaster. And which brings me back to my point of responsibility and having a tough conversation. I think it's inherent on every member to, if you see something now, it used to be I would never go and have pull Robert over and be like, hey, Robert, man, we have this shift today. I noticed that something's off with you. Let's actually sit down and have a conversation about it before we actually roll out. That never used to happen. And if it did, it was a rarity. I think that's something from an instructor perspective that I've been trying to push to everybody. It's the reason why I collaborate with all of you and all the additional training things that we do. It's, how do we get people to understand that having a tough conversation is okay and it's needed? Saying, Robert, I realize that something's not right today. Something's not right. And if you're not willing to admit that, then me having the cojones to go up to maybe my sergeant or whoever and say, hey, boss, I think maybe, you should have a chat with so-and-so, or maybe something's not right there. We're not having those conversations yet. And so what I'd like to pose to the panel is, how do we start those conversations within the organization itself throughout the chain of command, and maybe almost more from an institutional level? We talked about an officer level. let's take it to an institutional level now, for the decision makers. What is it that they should be doing when it comes to mental health, resiliency, and things like that for their officers? And how do we start having those discussions?
I think what Sajal said earlier, it goes back to having a psychologically safe workspace in the policing environment. Conceptually, that seems great, but most police environments are run with sort of a military-like hierarchy. So it's bridging that gap between them. What you just said, Adam, I look back in my policing career, I would work a 9 or a 10-hour night shift, and I had court in the morning, and I had to work that night. Now, you would think logically, at the end of my court, I shouldn't have to go to work. And if I had even put that forth, that would receive negative. No, you're gonna, well, I haven't had any sleep. Well, that's the way the job is. We need to identify similar situations like this and identify that's not realistic. And there are potential liabilities for changing the culture. That's really what it has to. We have to change that culture, and officers have to feel psychologically safe to be able to communicate these things, both to peers and to their supervisors, and right to the top.
So I have a question for those of you, for everybody pretty much, is about the same thing. So Adam, I agree, the opportunity to have those conversations, but when do those happen? One of my big concerns is that when we change to one officer in a vehicle, those conversations can't happen. And I really believe there was some richness that happened when you had 2 officers in a vehicle. So I've been asking, we know the budgets are cut, and we have officers that go out there all day, call to call, and they're not able to have those conversations in their squad cars and their patrol cars. What are we missing that was happening in those 2 people in a car that I think made a big difference? You could say to your partner you're driving around, hey, you don't seem right. You could process a critical incident, or as you call it, operational stress. So did we lose that by the decisions that were made to reduce it to 1 officer in a vehicle?
I think that there. I don't know if there's any studies offhand to deal with that, but I think it also comes back to what Adam was kind of getting to. It's addressing work-life balance, and we do a horrible job dealing with that historically, because anytime you have discipline within an organization, the first thing I look at is trauma. Those members, they might be an impaired situation, and they've been they're off duty or going home from after work or something like that. They know better. They know to enforce it, stuff like that. That screams out to me that there's undiagnosed trauma there for that member. And historically, organizations all that somebody's got a drinking problem, somebody's got a bad marriage. Well, why did they have a drink problem? Why did they have a bad marriage? And we need to look at that from a macro perspective. And I've been to more graduation ceremonies than I can remember. And every leader that speaks at a graduation ceremony for new recruits always talks about those recruits being the best of the best. And in all reality, they are, because at least in Canada, because there's more diversity, language, education, all kinds of things that are awesome for the profession. And but those members are still having problems, even when they bring all those good things. And at some point, when we have those bumblebee stings and the cumulative trauma, and we don't really have a proper peer support system, maybe in our organization, or we're just don't know where to go to find professional assistance. The only switch we have to deal with everything is emotional numbing. And that emotional numbing is an emotion, but when you have emotional numbing, at some point in time, you might be able to flip the switch on your brain, if you can visualize that on the side of your head. And I go to work and I see all kinds of trauma and stuff, and I shut it off, and I come home and I flick it back on. But at some point in time, that burns out, and you can't. So you come home and you're still emotional numbing. You can't engage with your loved ones, family, community, and then you're back to work, and then it comes into sleep, like Dr. Samuels was talking about. And a lot of times that lack of sleep is a form of trauma as well, because I know from personal experience, if you're ruminating about something and dealing with stuff, you're not getting a whole lot of sleep at nighttime, but yet you're back and you're putting on the mask and you're going and pushing yourself and doing all the jobs, and then you get more things dumped on you, and then you come home and that emotional numbing is the only downtime that you can have. So you push all any contact with friends, family, relatives, whatever away, because that's the only decompression time that you can get.
I'd like to pipe in with the tough conversation piece, because I actually did a whole TED talk about heroic conversations, which offers a framework to people both at home and at work to be able to bring up these conversations. And it also shares a little bit about the personal story and journey on how we landed where we are, dealing with PTSD in our home. And no longer, I'm proud to say that it's no longer PTSD, but instead it's PTG, post-traumatic growth. And, there's so many sciences that we can be leveraging. And I just want to, remind people that there's resources and sciences that we can be leveraging. And some of the resources include, again, your own families, your spouses. So leaders of organizations can find creative ways to actually integrate family back into the equation, because we are the supporting factors when the officers come home. We are the people who can recognize when things aren't right as well. We just don't know where to go to communicate that. So there's a missing link, a missing connection there. And so what would happen if we could have that bridged? And what kind of impact and teamwork could we have at addressing some of these issues? So again, the TED Talk is there. If you Google my name, it'll come up, and it's called Heroic Conversations. And it's a framework that can be offered to families, to departments, to individuals that might be helpful as well as to bringing up some of these tough conversations.
I think I got to bring Sejal on to do some roundtables with me, because she facilitates parts of conversations almost like she's reading my mind here. And so what I'm going to do, because we're coming close to time for our block here, I hope everyone's had a chance to engage in the chat and engage with these awesome experts. And if you haven't, please take the opportunity to do so. But I want to go around real quickly one more time and to echo what Sejal said, talking about resources and things that are available. I know each one of you have your own resources and things that are available, so I'd like to give you the chance to share those with everyone, and then we can finish off the conversation. So, Dr. Robbie, I'll start with you, and we'll go around the horn.
Okay. I think I said my book was one of the resources, and I wrote it for the first responders, so it can be in your hands and to walk through that. It includes a chapter on families and children of first responders, because I'm a child of a police chief and granddaughter of a police sergeant. So how it affects your life as a kid, your whole family goes into the career, not just an individual. So those pieces, and prevent it. I hear so often, I'll never unsee what I saw. And let me tell you, EMDR therapy is so helpful, but to clear the calls, clear your cases. We talk about a parade of faces that haunt you. We can clear that with EMDR therapy. So your post-traumatic stress injury becomes a post-traumatic stress growth that can really change people's lives and help them and their families both at work and at home. So thanks for having me.
Bill?
Post-traumatic growth is a necessity, and I refer to it as illuminating with hope, growth, and recovery. And Badge Life Canada in across the country as badgelifecanada.org. There is we deal with a tremendous amount of things virtually. We offer psychoeducation, peer sessions on a weekly basis. We also offer that for organizations that are having morale issues or recently COVID issues with outbreaks in the workplace, and assisting with that. Our programs, as I stated at the very start, we deal with participants that are dealing with operational stress injuries. We're also dealing with a leadership stream, which is extremely important. And the leaders come and learn. They don't come with participants. They come strictly with other leaders. And the offshoot of that, which we anticipated, was a lot of the leaders actually maybe haven't had time to realize that they have undiagnosed trauma accumulated over their careers as well, and they're impacting members under their command with promotion, different assignments, and all those kind of things. The other stream we have now is for discipline, which, as I stated, we've identified is always pretty much trauma-based. And because we are, for the most part, hiring good individuals, and but yet we're not giving them the supports that they require. And it's all about coming together, making it more conducive so that everyone is on the same page and kind of dealing with the same, understanding the problem and coming together in the middle.
Awesome. Robert.
Dealing with law enforcement stress under limited budgets and limited funding, peer support is so important. And not as just having a peer support group, but having that peer support group properly trained with the proper tools that they are going to be able to be effective in their positions as a peer support representative. And so the school that I teach at, although they're a graduate school, the College of Certified Psychophysiologists, they have a certificate program designed specifically for people that want to serve in a peer support role. It's a certificate in police mental wellness, and it incorporates a holistic model incorporating trauma interventions such as critical incident stress debriefing, which is so important in mitigating the sort of effects of trauma that police officers are going to deal with on a daily basis, and education. Get educated. And I say this not only to peer support officers, but to general frontline officers. Understand how your body works so that when you find yourself in a situation where you are feeling the natural effects of stress and trauma, you understand that there's nothing wrong with you and that it's reinforcing that you're a human.
Yeah, Sejal, you go ahead.
Oh, you threw me off there.
Just throwing you under the bus.
Yeah, so for me, we founded Mind Armor to help departments to offer training, psychoeducation, and even consulting to help departments navigate occupational stress. And then SOS was founded specifically to address and help members directly, as well as their families, and also offer support in a group environment. So, and this was based on a real personal journey and why we felt that this needed to be done. In terms of resources, if you go to sejalbellin.com, there's a whole list of resources that are available to you. And simply, honestly, if you just Google me, there's tons of videos out there. I do a lot of public speaking events, and I put all the recordings online so that they're accessible and the information's out there for you. The main thing is you need to recognize you are not alone. You do not need to go through this alone, and to understand that there's not something wrong with you when needing some support or wanting some education, because these are regular traumatic reactions, and we can change them to responses so that you will be able to deal with these things a lot better.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I deal with a tiny little part of this that's what I would say is, helps to prevent. So in other words, in the career, when you're at the beginning and you're really healthy and you can tolerate the stressors of shift work and, not getting enough rest, you let that go pretty far. So I would say that if you are aware, if the individuals who are watching this are aware that they struggle with something around their sleep and don't get enough rest, that's important. And, we offer the services. We're very unique in Canada because we deal with law enforcement officers, and we can address those basic problems dealing with shift work that many members and officers deal with, and make all the other problems, which are very big, much worse.
Awesome. Well, first and foremost, I want to thank all of you for taking the time today and joining me. If you're watching this right now and you're thinking, hey, an hour wasn't enough time, I'm with you. We know that we were going to be able to only skim the surface on so many topics. So what I would like to do is just let everybody know that Every one of the instructors that you see here will also, I'll have the opportunity to do some things with them through the ILET network individually and dive deep into their areas of expertise. So if you're ever looking for more resources on any of the instructors here or any other additional resources on mental health and resiliency or anything like that, check out ILET Network. You can come see us there, and there's going to be all of these great instructors and experts, as well as plenty more and more of an international perspective. So we hope you can join us there. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining us here on this panel for Officer Mental Health at the Blue Line International Expo. We look forward to seeing you next time. Till then, stay safe.
We will now head into our final networking break before closing remarks at 3:15.